you draw a comparison between Mark Wahlberg and Jimmy Kimmel, right? Both of whom have done some sketchy shit in the past, maybe. Marky Mark when he was a child, really. He was 19, I think. Kimmel when he was in his late 30s, which is quite a bit different. And he did blackface and a number of other things that weren't exactly kosher. But because he's cozied up to the wokeness in Hollywood, his crimes kind of go unmentioned. And because Mark Wahlberg is just apolitical in general and doesn't get involved in any of that stuff, his get brought up anytime, he gets brought up. So I don't think it's that they've lost their mind. I think they're really smart. They're just cowards. They're afraid to say what they think.
Well, I think it's fear across the board, but I think it's cowardly when you have people who have the cachet to fight back and don't. Like I mentioned Stephen King quite a bit because one of the richest authors around, has got decades of goodwill. Certainly doesn't need love and affection at this point. And if he was canceled for any reason, he'd just fall back on his pile of money. But when the cancel culture mob came for him, he basically said, yes, you're right, I'm wrong, and did an apology tour. So I think, I have some empathy for actors and talent who are just starting out, who are new, who don't have the financial resources, and who are afraid of what's going on in the culture. And they know that if they say the wrong thing, that they may never rise to the top. They may never get that great gig. But I also have a different feel for people who are at or near the top, like the Jimmy Kimmels, the Stephen Colberts, who either cheer on cancel culture or pretend like it's not an existential threat to creative freedom, because it is.
Right. I mean, so The Rock supported Joe Rogan and then didn't support Joe Rogan. And then immediately after that, a video of him, which most people had already seen, mocking Asian people, came out but nothing. Like there was no further discussion of it. It's very bizarre to me how that happens. But I guess it is, everybody kind of does that. Republicans have been pretending like they're still conservatives and that have an R at the end of their name in political office for 30 years now. So that's expanding over. I'm just, the point is everybody kind of does that. But this one seems particularly egregious because you're holding people to a standard that essentially can disrupt, if not outright, end their career in entertainment, right?
Yeah, and it's often for things that were done years ago, decades ago, that was at the time considered either appropriate or not outrageously offensive. So, how do you live a life and try to be a good person and then think, okay, well, I don't know what our culture will look like 10 years from now. Maybe things I'm saying, maybe shows I'm producing right now will be deemed offensive in 10, 20 years, or maybe even earlier. So it's this whole, culture where you have to kind of walk on eggshells. You don't know what's right, what's wrong. And also, it's also wildly inconsistent. Like you said, if you kind of toe the progressive line, there's a good chance you'll get away with all the junk in your past. But if you don't kind of align with that worldview, you're more susceptible. It's like Kevin Hart. Kevin Hart was a very apolitical guy, very funny, very upbeat guy. If you look at him on social media, he's very positive, and he doesn't really get into the nitty gritty of politics. So when his material from like 10 or so years ago resurfaced, and it was kind of crude about having a gay son, he was ripe for attack, and they kicked him off the Oscar hosting duties. So that's where we are.
Yeah, that's really fun. I can't imagine Kevin Hart taking a political stance, right? I mean, it seemed like for a very long time, comedy was the one bastion of entertainment that was kind of unaffected by that. And then George Bush came around, and to get sometime around 2003, 2004, to get an easy applause break, you just said, "Oh, Bush sucks," in a stand-up room, and everybody's like, "Wow, you're so brave to say that." So you've written this book. It's titled Virtue Bombs: How Hollywood Got Woke and Lost Its Soul. You've been covering Hollywood for a long time, both culture and film. How did this start, do you think? Because it used to be, even into the 70s, I mean, you're talking about like John Wayne and Clint Eastwood and people like that were some of the most famous dudes in Hollywood through the 60s and 70s, right? And then Clint Eastwood through the 70s and 80s. Bruce Willis as well was one of the top action stars. He's a noted Republican. But then it went a little wild somewhere. And where was it, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, I think that Hollywood got much more political during the Bush years. The anti-war fervor certainly kicked in a way that I hadn't seen before. I think that's one change that is noticeable. But I think what's happening now in the culture, in Hollywood culture, is either a reflection of or an outgrowth of the overall culture that we're living through. You know, a couple of years ago, they made a movie, No Safe Spaces, about what's going on in college campuses. And they said, you know, by the way, this might leak into the real world. And of course, it leaked in a very aggressive fashion in record time. So I think Hollywood is reflecting that to a certain degree. I also think that Hollywood, I mentioned fear before. I think Hollywood has always been fearful, the community. You've got actors who are afraid of the younger, prettier star behind them. You've got actors who are afraid if their next movie bombs, they may not get the best scripts, you know, down the road. Are they good looking enough? What happens if they get wrinkled, they lose their hair? So I think fear is baked into the cake, but now you kind of layer on this sort of woke mindset where, oh my gosh, did I say the wrong thing? Did I say the right thing well enough on social media? So I think it's been kind of bubbling up, but I think it really kind of hit warp speed. Maybe 2016, I remember the Ghostbusters debacle, the 4 female Ghostbusters, and how the media treated that movie and how the culture treated that movie, how it was important, it was empowering. And if you had any sort of quibbles about the movie, you were deemed a misogynist. And I think that was one of those moments where people think, well, oh my gosh, things are changing, the culture is changing. I think even film critics reviewed that one on a curve, hoping to kind of boost it. And, you know, and that's not even me saying that. Richard Roper, a left-leaning film critic, mentioned that a while ago. So it happens in fits and starts. I think it does sort of mirror the culture at large. But I think that the political nature of Hollywood really did kick in during the Bush years. And then Trump, of course, was just poured rocket fuel all over everything.
Sure. Do you think it's weird in the new Ghostbusters, same as the old one, that the as inclusive as they tried to be, the black lead character was still a blue-collar person while everybody else was a well-educated white woman? Is that weird to you? Like, how tone-deaf exactly are these folks? And that maybe that's the problem. It's like this impossible-to-meet purity standard. Like, no matter how far you go, you can never get to a place where you're completely beyond reproach, and that's kind of how you know it's a fucking stupid system, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we overanalyze everything. And look at that movie. It's Leslie Jones. She is big. She is tall. She has a very boisterous, outsized personality. So I don't think you look at her and say, I'm going to make her a bookworm. I mean, that's kind of, it'd be tough to kind of swallow just based on what she brings to a movie theater. So, you know, there were people who said, oh, look, they put the black person was the blue collar. I mean, that argument was raised at the time of the movie. So you're not wrong in a way. But at the end of the day, it is just one movie. It is just one character. You know, if you are upset about that, then maybe make another movie with another black woman, female character who's more nuanced and more sophisticated. You know, the Hidden Figures came out, I guess, maybe a little bit after that movie that told the heroic story of those 3 female scientists who were black and how they were mistreated and how what they contributed to the space program. So there's room for lots of stories. And I think we do ourselves a disservice when we kind of nitpick these certain situations, but that's what happens across the culture. But what I don't like about that is that it often will prevent storytellers from telling the stories they want to share, because you want to have the creative freedom to say, hey, this story I'm writing, there's a black character and he's downtrodden, but you know what? He is the hero. He does rise up. He does have a wonderful arc. And I want to share that story. And if you kind of short circuit that process, I think that's where the art kind of fails.
Yeah, for sure. And it's, you know, I've always kind of rebuffed the idea that we should be repackaging old things with new moralistic viewpoints. You know what I mean? Like that doesn't really make any sense. That's not who that, like, it's kind of an erasure situation, right? I mean, one of the big problems in the West right now is that we solve problems so well that the next generation forgets why we had to solve that problem in the first place, and they recreate the problem by jettisoning the very reasonable and effective solution that we created for it. And, you know, when you start taking people when you start reimagining who characters were based on today, like, so there's this, Douglas Murray's got a new book out, The War on the West. And in it, he talks about how Mikhail Foucault is a child rapist, but that all gets covered up because people believe in postmodernism. Marx was a notorious racist, and that gets covered up because people like socialism and Marxism and stuff. And the response to that is, well, they were men of their time. Like, yeah, of course. Everybody is a man or woman of their time.